Hello, welcome to my podcast on four separate events where the government killed a lot of people. Just some really quick background. I'm going to try to chop this up as much as I can to make it flow better. Also, sorry for my basement. That looks like Jeffrey Dahmer did live here at some point. It's just how it looks. Again, just quickly, it is better to listen to this first before reading the paper. The United States is no stranger to violence whatsoever. In fact, the US is often said to be one of the most violent first world countries in the world. That fact alone is very disturbing, but what happens when the violence occurs because of the ones that lead us? The United States government often incites violence in other countries, but when they spark violence here onto their own citizens, what are we to do? This podcast will cover four separate but similar cases of the US government harming their own citizens to get their expected result out of certain situations. As you will also see, it seems the government will go to whatever length they need to be seen as heroes. On May 4th, 1970, a massacre took place at Kent State University. This followed protests from the previous day that had to be broken up by the Ohio based National Guard. This all happened because President Nixon instructed the military to invade Cambodia. Around the nation, anti Vietnam protests and riots had already been happening for a while at this point, but the students wanted to participate in their own way, and their goal was for the violence to stop. The guards used tear gas, beatings, and bayonets to snuff the protests out. On May 4th, another rally at noon started and was shortly dispersed by tear gas once again. Just a little addendum here. That all took place on May 1st through the 3rd, and then May 4th is when the true tragedy happened. After the tear gas was thrown, the guards retreated, but had mean words, rocks, and tear gas canisters thrown at them, most of which the tear gas had already dissipated. At 12:24 p.m., the 28 guardsmen opened fire on the protesters. It lasted for 13 seconds, and 67 rounds were fired. The second amount that it took is obviously hard to actually look to actually find any solid info on, especially with in such a hectic, crazy uh, period of time. But it's generally supposed to be around 13 seconds. Nearest student was shot 60 yards away, and most were over 100 yards away. One person shot was not participating in the protest at all, and was an ROTC student. The Reserve Officers Training Corps, or ROTC, is a program for training commissioned officers for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. Sorry about the noise. This essentially means they shot one of their own as well. In total, 4 students were killed and 9 were wounded by the gunfire. Following the event, the Justice Department and Scranton Commission concluded the shooting was, and I quote, unnecessary, unwarranted, and inexcusable, unquote. 25 students were indicted for protest and vandalism, with the university also being shamed for fostering a lax environment. No guardsmen were ever proven guilty following a trial. No damages were awarded, but they got a statement of regret from the guardsmen. There's plenty of evidence to suggest the Nixon administration obstructed the investigations as well. Propaganda pieces were also run on the students, which seems to have worked because 58% of Americans believe the shootings were justified. All of this was followed by student strikes and even more protests, something the government definitely did not intend to happen. But this horrible shooting directly inspired a shooting that occurred at Jackson State University as well. Jackson State University in Mississippi was affected by a very similar situation on May 15th, 1970. Again, protests had been going on for the past few days before this, but on May 15th, in the early morning, it was around midnight, protests continued from the previous day. The police reported a firebomb was thrown from inside a dorm room. They protested in retaliation for the Kent State massacre, and racist motorists drove through campus and shouted racial slurs. There was also some anti-Vietnam statements that were being pushed as well during the protest. The campus and police refused to do anything about the motorists. This is significant because the campus was and still is a historically black college, although not exclusively black. Around 12:05 a.m., without warning or in order to disperse, National Guardsmen who had been deployed and law enforcement opened fire on the protests. They also fired at Alexander Hall, which was where the firebomb was supposedly thrown from. This was a female dormitory. And for over 30 seconds, they fired on the crowd and building, with a total of 460 bullets being fired. The front of the hall was riddled with bullets, and unfortunately, Philip Lafayette Gibbs and James Earl Green were killed. Green was just a 17-year-old high school student visiting his friends on campus. Gibbs was a 21-year-old pre law student and a father. 12 others were wounded by gunshots that were students. The police continued beating and arresting students after this. Law enforcement claimed they were fired upon by a sniper, but no evidence of this of any kind was ever found. The Scranton Commission, who previously investigated the Kent State Massacre, investigated this case too. They deemed the shooting, and I quote, unreasonable and unjustified, end quote, and said the cops and guardsmen were unreasonably afraid of the students. A grand jury of mostly white citizens exonerated the officers. They blamed the students for the massacre. No guardsmen were ever even tried. Years later, the families of the victims received a small financial settlement. While the Kent State Massacre received widespread outrage and news coverage, the Jackson State Massacre sadly received far less in both areas. The next story. Randy Weaver was a man with heavy ties to the Aryan Nation. This group has since been decentralized and fragmented into smaller groups, but in the 1980s and the 1990s, they were a fairly large group. They held neo-Nazi beliefs as well as worshipped Hitler. They believed that Northern Europeans were the true chosen people of God. An undercover agent for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or the ATF, BATF, whatever people call them both, infiltrated this group and befriended Randy Weaver. He sold Weaver 2 illegally sawed-off shotguns. Once the agent revealed his true intentions to Weaver, he pressured him into becoming an informant. Weaver, in turn, informed the Aryan nations. This move would tragically set up all of the insane events to follow that would affect so many people, not just Randy. In response to this, Weaver was indicted for gun violations, but after a series of court errors and miscommunications, he missed his court date. A warrant was issued for his arrest, leading him to be surveilled by the U.S. Marshals for 16 months. On August 21, 1992, 6 deputy marshals entered Weaver's property, known as Ruby Ridge in Idaho, with the intent of doing reconnaissance for a possible arrest. Little extra context: Ruby Ridge is like the mountainous area, or one of the mountainous areas in Idaho, and so his house sat on this land, but his house is often just referred to as Ruby Ridge. Essentially, through the reconnaissance, they wanted a lay of the land to map out the area for planning, but this area is remote, heavily wooded, and mountainous. This made not getting caught tricky in some ways, but better for them in others. The people present in the home at the time were Randy Weaver, Vicky Weaver, his wife, Samuel Weaver, their son, or Sammy, Sarah Weaver, their daughter, Kevin Harris, who was Samuel's friend, and Rachel Weaver, their infant daughter. They also had a different daughter that was not present in the home at the time. Also, their dog Striker, who was outside at the time. As they made their way up to the house, they threw rocks to see if they could lure Weaver out and to test for guard animals. They said luring him out was like to isolate him and for their safety, so that was their explanation for that. Striker started barking, which caused Samuel, or Sammy, and his friend Kevin to grab their rifles to investigate. The marshals then decided to escalate by shooting Stryker, instantly killing him. The cause for this is still not necessarily known. Sammy and Kevin fired back in retaliation, and shortly after the firefight erupted, Randy ran out of the house during this, but managed to get Kevin inside. As he was getting Sammy back into the house, Sammy is shot in the back from a pistol fired from Marshal Larry Cooper after trying to flee. Randy then shot and killed Marshal William Deegan in retaliation. The marshals then withdrew and called for a mass amount of reinforcements. Sammy would eventually die outside the house, succumbing to his injuries. Eventually, an FBI hostage rescue team is deployed to the field and takes control of the scene. FBI Commander Richard Rogers drafts new rules of engagement. These rules state, and I quote, any adult male observed outside the cabin with a weapon could and should be shot and killed. This was a departure from the FBI's normal rules of engagement and was later found to be in violation with Idaho state law on justifiable homicide. Normally, use of lethal force was only used by the FBI to prevent an imminent threat to life. That was their original use of force guidelines. During this time, it is known that everyone was on edge, and Vicky and Sarah were on the verge of a mental breakdown. Vicky and Randy's child was heard crying often on during the night. Rachel, the infant child. A day and a half after the initial shooting, the family decided to give up. They stepped outside of the cabin only to be met by sniper fire. Lon Haruchi, I think is his name, who was positioned several hundred yards away, fired on the group. The first bullet hit Randy in the shoulder. The other three try to get back into their home as the second bullet is fired. Vicky opened the door and got inside, with Kevin following right behind her. The bullet passed through Kevin and hits Vicky in the head. When she was shot, she was holding their baby. Later on, Haruchi said he was trying to hit Randy and did not see Vicky or the baby. This does not make any sense, though, as he never mentioned not seeing Kevin, who was also hit by this bullet, along with Randy not being in that line of fire. This also does not make sense, as Haruchi was an expert shot and was positioned far enough away from them to not have wind or the Coriolis effect affect the trajectory of the bullet. Coriolis effect, if you don't know, is something snipers have to account for, as a bullet will curve around the earth at far distances, making the bullet seem like it's falling over time, which is not to be confused with how gravity makes a bullet fall. The standoff occurred for 6 more days before the bloody stalemate ended. On this day, a former Green Beret and right-wing figure who the family trusted acted as an intermediary. Bo Gritz approached the house and got Randy to surrender. The one condition of his surrender, though, was that he could be represented by famed defense attorney Jerry Spence. The condition was accepted, and on August 30th, Kevin Harris surrendered. The following day, Randy Weaver surrendered along with his 2 daughters. In his trial, public opinion and the government's opinion clashed. The FBI could not keep their unsavory acts quiet, as all was revealed in the trial. All was revealed that we know about anyways. The FBI was questioned about their rock throwing, as many viewed it as a way to ambush Randy, but they said it was a reconnaissance probe gone wrong. FBI leadership was implicated in the controversial shoot to kill rule, but no high-level players faced criminal penalties. Further, the fact that Vicky was holding their infant at the time of her gruesome death became the single most powerful and controversial image of the case, which fueled heavy outrage. The whole situation grimly also led Randy and his daughter to have to care for her lifeless body until the surrender, which disgusted the public and the jury. Randy and Kevin, who were shot, also received no medical care for the bullets they took. Shockingly, it was revealed Haruchi used a suppressed .308 rifle, which is a caliber of a bullet, which is not at all used in crisis response. This showed pre-planning. Randy Weaver and Kevin Harris were acquitted of all serious charges, even murder. After all of it, though, Randy was still found guilty for the original offense that started all of it: failure to appear in court. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison, but given a 14-month credit for the time he had already served. Judge Edward Lodge criticized the FBI and the marshals and fined them $1,920, really odd number, for illegally withholding evidence and lying. He also chastised their, and I quote, callous disregard, end quote, for the rights of the defendants and, quote, complete lack of respect, end quote, for the court. In civil court, the U.S. government paid out $3.1 million to Randy and his surviving children. All this led to a massive anti-United States government movement at the time, and is still seen to this day. Less than a year later, on February 28, 1993, another massacre was committed by the U.S. government, who was looking for a win after the loss and very public trial of Ruby Ridge. In this case is possibly the worst event discussed yet. Definitely the highest body count. For some background, the Branch Davidians were an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventist Church that started in the 1930s. Their center was established at Mount Carmel near Waco, Texas. The group faced multiple leadership crises, with their leader finally falling in 1993 to David Koresh. Koresh's interpretation of the Bible, which included a fast-approaching doomsday, was seen as gospel in the Branch Davidians. Koresh claimed he was a sinful Messiah, as well as a local newspaper, or a sinner chosen by God to lead his followers in the last days of earth. He taught that the Lamb in Revelations 5 was the final messenger who alone could open the 7 seals of the book of Revelation and interpret its meaning. Of course, Koresh was this Lamb. Long before federal involvement, the local law was involved in the Branch Davidians' internal struggles, as they had been called multiple times to stop violent leadership struggles. The federal government got involved when the possession and manufacture of firearms and explosives was found on the premises from these local authorities and individuals that left the group. These ex-Davidians also told stories of social deviance in the cult, and cult is how the government viewed them. The cases of social deviance included multiple marriages to one person and sexual relations with minors. It's never truly been proven for reasons we will see later. On the 28th, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, or BATF, attempted to serve search warrants and to make arrests to the group they viewed as paramilitary. 4 BATF agents and 6 Branch Davidians were killed in a gunfight that broke out. In total, 16 agents were wounded in this fight. The Davidians claimed they were acting in self-defense after the 45-minute-long gunfight. The FBI immediately got involved as the Davidians barricaded themselves inside. Later that day, the FBI hostage rescue team took command, many of which also took part in the events of Ruby Ridge. Phone conversations were had with Koresh, but Koresh refused to surrender unless they broadcasted his message to the general public through news channels mainly. After they did, he only released some children and adults. The negotiations were not working, so they used psychological warfare instead. Bright lights were shown on the compound at night, and high-volume music, chants, and audio of rabbits being slaughtered were played 24/7. It is very obvious that they were not looking out for the safety of the people in the compound, very similar to how the same team acted at Ruby Ridge. The audio played borders on parody and shows some level of sadism. Personal night vision and armored vehicles were deployed as well. In mid-April, the FBI command reached a battle plan and had not been using negotiators for quite some time. A plan was approved to inject CS gas into the compound, using tanks to break the compound walls and disperse the gas. The reasoning for this was they believed the conditions inside were deteriorating and child abuse was taking place. There was never any evidence of this, and it's very hard to get evidence after what we will see later. The leaders of this plan were told, despite the gas being highly flammable, that there was little chance for a fire to take place. They executed the plan as planned at 6 a.m., but were met with gas mask Davidians and gunfire. About 6 hours later, at noon, of course, there were fires seen exploding out of the building, specifically from the front door and the back bunker entrance. Within minutes, the stored ammunition inside blew up and went off. Despite their knowledge that fires were possible, no firefighters or their equipment were kept nearby, which led to almost nothing being done about the fires. The aftermath inside the compound was horrific, to say the least. The reports vary, but around 70 to 90 people were found dead inside, including David Koresh, a pregnant woman, and 21 children. Only 9 Davidians had survived, but in total, 164 Davidians had been killed throughout the siege, most of which came on the last day. The rest came in that initial gunfight. In the entire 51-day siege, only 4 agents died, all of which came from the ATF agents that died on the first day. Koresh died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Most of the women and children were found huddled together in the bunker, which all of them died from the flames or smoke inhalation. Following this, the U.S. government claimed the Davidians set the fire themselves as an act of mass suicide, but this has been heavily contested. This is also something that the FBI was very worried about, that they would commit a mass suicide. There really hasn't been any evidence to directly support this, just people saying they've heard audio of Davidians saying, "Light the fires." It was noted in the trial that most of them more than likely would have survived if the tanks had been removed, freeing up escape paths. Many claims also came in regarding the FBI shooting directly at fleeing Davidians multiple times throughout the siege, although they obviously denied that. All of these facts sparked intense public outrage and calls for people to be put in jail that were involved. All of this was compounding even further because of the Ruby Ridge incident, as well as I mentioned a lot of the people that were originally involved in that Ruby Ridge incident, which happened less than a year before this, had also been involved here. Still, though, no agents faced punishment for their actions. It was later stated by the Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh as being the primary reason for the bombing. This is further proven by the fact that the bombing happened on the second anniversary of the siege's end. Even nowadays, the ATF and FBI post on the anniversary of the siege's end every year to give condolences to the fallen agents. In summary, these four incidents, of which they are just a drop in the bucket, clearly showcase the government's lack of care for the public's health and safety, especially if it is people who directly oppose them. For the Kent State story, I used the trusted sources of the Kent State Massacre article by L.B. Shriver and the book Murder in America, A History by Roger Lane. For the Jackson State story, I used the trusted sources of the Gibbs Green tragedy on the Jackson State University website and the book Murder in America, A History by Roger Lane. For the Ruby Ridge story, I used the trusted sources of the Ruby Ridge shootout article by David Kopel and the Famous Trials website. For the Waco story, I used the trusted sources of the State Intervention and Holy Violence, Timgad, Palo Strovisk, Waco article by Brent Shaw. And that's my podcast. Thank you for listening. Bye.